Thank you for introducing me. The study I present is phonological trends of gendered names in USA and Korea. And my name is Jong-mi Kim from Kangwon National University, Republic of Korea. And my co-author is Professor Sharon Obasi at the University of Nebraska at Kearney. And I shall begin my talk introducing interplay of phonology and onomastics and phonology of gendered names. Then I will explain the methods. Number one, historical data on popular names, and number two, survey on gender of names. Then I will show results on universal sounds for gender specificity and decreasing gender specific names. And finally, we'll discuss whether there is cross-cultural influence or whether there is universal trends. There are three main points in this study. Number one, gender valence of name, masculine versus feminine in English. And number two, cross-linguistic comparison of English and Korean names. And number three, emergence of gender-neutral names and unmarked phonology. As for the background in naming trends, number one, scholars who looked at gendered personal names in English have said that there are phonological rules that govern gendered personal names. This point has been raised by many scholars, including Cassidy and colleagues, Huff, Slater and Feynman, and Barry and Harper. They've suggested longer names and vowel endings, for example, are for female names in English. Among several suggestions here, Barry and Harper's study is particularly interesting and easily executable because they pinpointed that just by looking at three last letters, A, E, I, genders can be identified as female in English names. So we tested this in our study, where our data show gender specificity by final letter A, E, I in names, in Korean and English. We looked at both English names and Korean names because we were curious whether the name phonology may hold cross-culturally. It was unclear so far whether language-specific or cross-cultural, cross-linguistic is gendered phonology, to what degree and in what ways. There is a study presenting cross-linguistic evidence by Kai and Zhao. So there is a possibility that English phonology of gendered naming may hold in Korean data as well. And these two languages, Korean and English, are unrelated. What Kai and Zhao did was that they looked at gender in Min language, and the participants correctly identified what is male and what is female. And the participants are English and German speaking participants, and they did not speak Min language at all. So as for method, we use twofold to investigate these phonological trends of gendered names cross-culturally. We analyzed and collected two types of data. Number one, historical analysis, and number two, survey analysis. To do historical analysis of trend-oriented onomastic research, we obtained the data from government record of birth registration, 1940 and onwards by Korea Supreme Court and by US Social Security Administration. And for survey analysis, we did online surveys in the USA and in Korea on 720 names for decades, all decades, up to 2020. And the participants were college students, and we used randomized entry on a Likert scale of 5, asking the likelihood of male or female names. As for historical analysis, we obtained from authentic source, not private source, and we comprise the source comprise whole population of USA and Korea, male versus female, and birth names and changed names in Korean data, and top 20 names per decade and for the final year. So this is what the data look like for USA data, the 1940s, James, Robert, John, James, William, and for female names, Mary, Linda, Barbara, Patricia were popular. We did 1940s decade, 2010 decade, and year 2020. We made a comparable data in Korean as well. In Korean data, I understand you don't read Korean, but still, we made the same data set. And what you see is that each letter represents one syllable in Korean name, in Korean letter. So what you see that all names, all popular names throughout the decades are all 2 syllables. This is interesting because, well, one of the gender phonology said that longer names for female identification, but no, we use 2 syllables for both male name and female name. So that part of gender phonology doesn't hold cross-linguistically. And this is birth name. And we also collected changed names. And for changed names, all 2 syllables. So at least one kind of gender phonology is not cross-cultural. And even for English names, I'm not sure these don't look any longer than these. So at least one kind of gender phonology in literature is not quite clear. But we went for the vowel phonology. And what we did was that we looked at whether AEI vowels are also found in Korean names. And we did survey analysis as well. For survey analysis, we asked the participants, is this name male, female, or neutral? And we had 124 participants in Korea and 143 participants in the USA. And we did reliability check by duplicating neutral names, and the survey time was 10 to 15 minutes per person. And this is what USA survey form looked like. Five Likert scale of 5, definitely male, likely male, gender neutral, likely female, definitely female, and all names were randomized. You see Anthony male name, Jacob male name, Justin male name, Diane now female name, Matteo male name. All these must be answered by the respondents, and they answered what in this Likert scale, what each name belonged to. And we made the same survey form for Korea survey and Likert scale of 5 and randomized name entry. And the results, okay, we did analysis on historical names on final letters AEI, and we made survey analysis on gender specificity. Let me first discuss historical analysis of final letters AEI. What we found is that on figure 1, 3 last letters AEI identify female first names in the USA. So there's clear distinction between female name and male name. Female names use lots of AEI letters, and male name use very little AEI letters. And what's more interesting is that the same gender markers seem to be valid even in Korean language. In Korean language, especially for all the female names, they use AEI letters more, and male names hardly never use AEI final letters. And this is very interesting because gender marker AEI vowel letters hold cross-culturally, it is interesting, although it's different degree and different fashion, but still there seems to be a gender marker. And this is birth name. And because Korean data also had changed the name, I compared birth name with changed name. For changed name, the same trend holds for changed name as well as birth name, about similar decreasing trend. But what's more interesting is that for changed name, even in recent years, girls did not really use, women, because changed name is adult, okay. Women didn't like to use gender marker. Okay, so the survey analysis actually say women are less inclined to, and will show if this female marker is also have some correlation to survey analysis. So result number 2 is on survey analysis on gender specificity. And what we found after we did survey is that on gendered USA names, gendered first names slightly decrease in the US, decreasing fashion, but slight. But in gendered first names rapidly decrease in Korea. So there's clear distinction in US names that people know what's male name and what's female name. But in Korea, it's less and less clear in recent years and a lot less clear than USA names. So actually, people could identify gender and decreasing mode, but rapid decreasing and slight decreasing. Okay, and this is birth name, and I compared birth name with changed name in Korean data, and US data doesn't have available changed names, so we did only Korean data. And for birth names, gender specificity is indifferent, not really different between male and female birth names in Korea, because sometimes males are more specific and females are sometimes more gender specific. So it's not really, it's not, one gender is not better than the other gender. But changed name show throughout the year, gender specificity is clearer in male. All male names are higher, better specified than female names. In recent years, although it's not that clear. Okay, so that's really interesting because changed name is what people choose for their self. So what does all data mean? Okay, so let me remind you first what our main points were in the introduction. Our main points were number 1, gender valence of name in English, and number 2, cross-linguistic comparison of English and Korean names, and number 3, emergence of gender-neutral names and gendered name phonology. Okay, point 1, gender in English names. There's a clear pattern of gendered phonology of vowels through the decades, as claimed by Barry and Harper. So our study confirms his study. And this is consistent with all name data. All names for every year also show clear distinction between male name and female name in US. So female name use a lot more AEI final letters, and male name hardly never use AEI final letters. And this data of all names were taken from Laura Wattenberg's website, Baby Name Wizard. I accessed on 2020, and that said that this site is closed and the data is no longer available, but I luckily pulled out the data. So female names use AEI letters a lot more than male names. I just converted this scale into what I could compare with my data. And also the site, the new owner posts different kind of gender statistics. And I pulled out until less popular, up to less popular US names. And rank 5001 to 5010. And even for these 10 names, for girls, use 7 girls' names use AI final letter 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. And for male name, only 1. This and nothing else. So the pattern still holds, although this this E is silent, but still I just counted, as Varian Hopper says, just letters. And then so boys with 1 name and girls with 7 names out of 10 names each. So the trend holds unpopular names. This leads to our point number 2, cross-linguistic comparison. Will that trend hold in different culture? We saw English names and all the Korean names. Some name phonology is cross-cultural. And also, as I introduced in the introduction part, Kai and Zhao reported that in Min language, gender identification was possible. And also Sid and Paxman has also said that there is what female is, the concept of femaleness and maleness, and to associate it with shape. And this leads to point 3, because, well, gender phonology, there are some gender phonology seem to be cross-cultural. Then to what extent is that common and varied? Number 3 is that gender neutral names and unmarkedness. And there's emergence of gender neutral names as a cultural trend in both USA and Korea. A lot rapidly in Korea, slightly in USA. And we also associated this with phonology of gendered names to remind you that just by AEI marker, you can also identify gender, or to some extent, you find the gender correlation. Well, our results show possible future research idea. Number 1, examining state differences in the prevalence of gendered naming patterns. Well, state differences in naming patterns do exist, as reported by namesaking by Obasi. And it would be interesting to see if there are state differences in gendered names. And also examining national and state differences in gender neutral names by using a larger sample of US names would be interesting, because anecdotal reports suggest an increase in gender neutral naming. It would be interesting to verify this using US Social Security Administration data. So what's the take-home message? The conclusion is that number 1, cross-cultural phonology in gender-specific names. There is cross-cultural phonology in gender-specific names. For example, 3 last letters, AEI, identify female names. And gender specificity that we looked at is with 3 final vowels, AEI for female, and historically decreasing. Thank you for listening. Is there any question?
Thank you, Jong-mi. Thank you for your wonderful and interesting topic. And questions are welcome.
So I was wondering about, what about meaning as a gender marker? Like, I think some Korean names have meanings that are commonly known and associated with male or female. And that I think that could be interesting to study cross-linguistically. For example, like a flower for girls' names in different languages, you know, like, have you considered this? And maybe I wonder how that might interact with the phonology, if some words have certain endings that get popular or not.
Excellent, excellent question. Really excellent question. Actually, this is the data for birth name and change the name. And what you see in girl's name for birth name, cha, 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 cha. Do you see same looking letter all repeated here? And these contribute actually this meaning actually seem to contribute more on A, E, I letters, because all these are A letter ending. But what I present is also recent trend. Recently, do you see there's no R sound here? So recently, still, there are lots of variation in female names. Still, the AAI letter holds the distinction between male name and female name. So for this reason, I thought it's not totally meaning, it is sound. And for reference, when I was young, my father happened to say to me, my father knows nothing in English. He knows Japan, he studied in Japan, but he knows no English. But he said that for son, he likes to put harsh ending, the strong ending. And he likes to make soft opening for female. And that's exactly vowel ending and for female and obstruent or consonantal ending for male. And that's what's suggested in English phonology. And I was very interested in looking at the similarity in cross-cultural trend. Thank you for asking the question.
I have a question, if I may ask.
Yes.
Thank you for a very interesting presentation. One of the things that struck me is that the names in the USA actually have different cultural origins as well. So you mentioned Matteo, which is the Italian form of Matthew, and people of Greek heritage. I know many people of Greek heritage, and they have a different name set from Anglo-Saxon names. So I was really interested that Aristotle came up as an unusual name. So have you tried to look at the cultural heritage of the names as well and how that affects? But thank you for a very interesting presentation.
Excellent question, excellent question. And that's actually the phonological rules are raised by these people. They also mentioned these are from Latin phonology. And the phonological, why vowel marker at the end? Because, well, in Latin phonology, the female marker was vowel. so actually there is association to cultural heritage and today's name. What I try to see is that regardless of cultural heritage and regardless of unrelated language, is there any cross-linguistic common trend? And actually, this is what linguistics like to say. In linguistics, these days, the recent linguistics like to say about universalism and whether sounds are common, then what about human mind? What about cross-cultural similarity? But it's very excellent question. Yeah, I also asked about Matteo to my co-author, Dr. Sharon Obasi, about what the name is. Thank you very much. Well, while you are thinking, I would like to present this and possible future research idea. While doing research in different cultures, it's a lot of work, but examining between the states and larger sample would be very interesting if you can get the data. For Korean data, I couldn't get larger sample. For US data, I could get the whole national data from Laura Wattenberg's website, as I introduced before. So it is possible in from US Social Security Administration that you can get a larger sample of US names, and it will be very interesting. And what you see as trend is that this is very regular, because you have large sample. And this is popular name. It's very clear, but less regular because you have fewer names, lesser names, a smaller amount of names. So I think this is really interesting research idea if you would like to pursue.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you for your very interesting and inspiring research.